availability risks in some places and huge ones in others, but there's certainly different levels of risk, and those things can blow up fairly quickly. I mean, I think if you look at the situation of the border between the United States and Mexico, that's gotten so completely out of control because of the drug demand on the U.S. side of the equation and the gang control of drug transfers on the Mexican side of the border. That's a situation that has gotten out of control in a hurry, in part because the new Mexican president has decided that he's going to be the one that brings it under control. So, these things can be very difficult to predict. But of course, there's the stuff that you tend to think about: time zone differences, communication issues associated with having people, different parts of the world trying to communicate effectively. Infrastructure problems and inadequacies. If you've ever flown into India, I'll pick on India here, but I could pick on a number of other countries, and I could even pick on certain parts of the United States. If you've ever flown into India and some of the airports there, you'll know what I mean by an infrastructure problem. Or if you've tried to take a long road trip or train trip in India, these things can create risks and inefficiencies that you might not anticipate, and they can be very difficult to manage because obviously infrastructure problems are beyond the scope of the project. Skills availability. You see in a lot of these rapidly growing outsourced target countries a very wide base of the skills triangle, if you will. A lot of entry-level people available, but the skills triangle is very shallow. The apex is not very far above the floor, if you will, because the number of people who have, say, 20, 30 years of experience are pretty limited. So if you're looking to have somebody managing the testing who's got 15 years of test management experience, that's going to be harder to find in some countries than in others, and that using people who are juniors as test managers, of course, is going to increase the risk. And turnover. A lot of our clients have had some issues with turnover based on the things going on, dynamics in the country where they were outsourcing. So you really do have to take a look at all these things. I'm not saying that any of these things are necessarily fatal, but of course any unmanaged risk is more dangerous than one which is managed. Okay, now another thing that's important to think about is that outsourcing of just part of the development project does not necessarily reduce the level of risk. If you're outsourcing one or two components, you have to think about how tightly those components are coupled to the system as a whole. By coupled, I mean if that one of those components goes down, does that basically in effect take out the whole system? If the component is irreplaceable, it's harder then, of course, to recover if there are problems with the component. So an example of a replaceable component would be like a database management system where you could conceivably change your decision about which DBMS to integrate, but a custom-developed piece of code, of course, is less interchangeable or replaceable. The extent to which a component is essential, if it's an essential component, you can't just decide if things don't go well with the development of it, say, just drop it. Because if it's essential, you have no product if you drop it. And of course, if the vendor has problems delivering quality product, then that increases the likelihood that you'll get a bad component, and thus increases the overall risk. So you want to, if people are saying, well, we're not outsourcing the whole project, so it's less risky, I would do some careful analysis of these four areas and see if there's actually some serious unmanaged risk in here. Okay, now, it's hard sometimes to trust people that you've never met, and trust is important on complex projects, particularly when they start to run into difficulties. So if you have a project that's running into difficulties and you're just talking about this over a speakerphone or you're sharing emails back and forth, you might not be getting the whole message about what's really going on. So one of the things that I've often said is that conference calls, emails, those will be fine as far as routine communication when everything is going well, but the project gets into serious trouble, you're going to need to to go there. One of the things that I've said is that outsourcing requires jet fuel, and of course that's kind of a politically incorrect thing to say because you're supposed to worry about your carbon footprint and all of that good stuff, but it would be very difficult to evaluate outsourced companies and their staff to solve thorny problems, to build and maintain trust if you've never been there. So really I'd say plan on a visit, plan on a trip. We have one of our clients that decided to outsource their testing once to an organization. They'd never been there, never seen the facility, and when the project ran into trouble, they finally did decide to go there, and the facility turned out to be a garage in one of those rental space companies, one of the rental spaces that they'd converted into their test lab, and they were starting to have some problems because it got hot, and the heat was affecting the equipment. Obviously, the client would not have chosen that company if they had known what they were getting themselves into. So, early trips to build trust and relationship are good. Okay, cultures. Cultures differ, and the cultures, here I'm not just talking about cultural issues related to country, but I'm also talking about cultural issues related to companies. Different companies have different cultures, and they can be very, very important in the company, in the way they do business, and how well they mesh with other companies. We've certainly seen issues with some of our clients, particularly clients that did acquisitions, where they found that they had some real problems with meshing corporate cultures. The personality of the various team members can be issue, leadership skills, technical and moral leaders of the various organizations. I remember one of my client contacts making this comment about, we'd sat down and talked to this development manager of this development outsourcing company, and then we were walking out of the room, and I said, man, every time I have a meeting with that guy, I feel like I need to take a shower afterwards. This indicates a real problem with the cultures, because his feeling was that the guy was kind of a sleazy businessman, and he didn't like working with him. And you can imagine that created difficulties in their relationship and their ability to successfully execute projects together. Now, I'm not advising you to try to fix these cultural disconnects, but I think you need to try to adapt to them and certainly recognize them when they exist. Okay, now having done your prep work and gotten yourself together, it's important to maintain focus as you go through the projects. You want to make sure that the stuff is getting built, it's getting tested, the results are being gathered, useful information is being shunted around, to people are getting the right information at the right time to make smart decisions about testing and quality. You want to make sure that the communication channels are open, and there's got clear communication going on between people, that course correction is happening in a timely fashion, again, without imposing too many overheads, but without missing things for too long, that you have your radar up for any sort of unforeseen problems. Like I said, there are a lot of ways this can go wrong, and if you think of half of them, you've done really well. And of course, to the extent that you need to manage change, make sure that there's a process for that. Don't pretend that there isn't going to be any change. You want to watch out for turf battles, politics. Try not to get caught up in that stuff, particularly on the other side of the relationship. There's never any real advantage to someone, I believe, in inserting themselves into another organization's politics. That's just going to create more problems, and a lot of times those turf battles and political issues are an effort to try to achieve just that, to pull other people in. So to the extent that you can stand back and avoid it, that's good. One-time crisis. Don't be so crisis-driven that you start going, oh, we got to put a process in place for this. We got to put a process in place for that. It could indicate a hole in your process or your logistics, but it could also, if you have a blow-up, it could be a completely improbable set of events that led that to happen. And don't go too far with that. I mean, I remember one of our clients got really upset when the vendor, one of their testing vendors, sent them back some computers improperly packaged, and they got damaged. And they were saying, oh, these people are completely incompetent and so forth. I said, wait, it seems like quite a stretch to say that because somebody in the shipping capacity made a mistake in packaging up computers, that everybody within that organization is incompetent. You know, it was a potential distraction, but the important thing was to get focused back on, are the results good and are they meaningful? And again, minor differences in definitions and approaches, to keep that 80-20 rule in mind that I mentioned before. Okay, so hopefully this has given you some ideas on peeling the onion, the outsourcing onion. You know, I think outsourcing, as I said before, is something that's here